Hello. Hey, how long have we known each other?
We've known each other for, man, now it's been, I think, getting closer to 4 years. We met around this time, somewhere around
Mhm.
early fall, summer, early fall. Wow, man, it's been the time has come
Four
by
years.
fast.
Yeah. Wow. I felt like I just finished renewing my CEUs. Now I have 2 more years to review again.
You're an old, crusty BCBA now, solid vet.
Not yet. Well, I felt like we have done so much in terms of curriculum development, thinking about our companies. It's really very rare for us to talk about our own stories. So today, we just want to hear your story, and let's start you telling us about your early experience with autistic children and their families.
Yes, yes. So I got into the field completely by accident, which I think a lot of folks either was a sibling or have a child with autism. For me, I initially was a media production major, so I wanted to write movie scripts and move to Hollywood. But my undergrad was in psychology. I actually took a break from college, and during that break, just a friend reached out, and she was doing this thing called behavior therapy, and she needed some assistance. In my previous, I did do some work within the church, working with youth ministries and young kids. And so it was just kind of an experiment. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I was just fascinated why that child, I think he was 9 at the time, was doing the things that he was doing. And so almost like the movie The Matrix, it kind of had like the two pills. I just started to do a deep dive into autism because that was my first time knowing what autism was. And a funny story is that child just at that time just had a lot of things going on behavior wise. And so there was 4 people on the team. And of course, my friend was kind of overseeing. And so after 1 week, they had, well, the people on the team, there was a teacher who had lots of experience. There was 2 people who were, experienced in doing therapy, and I was the new fresh one. But after 1 week, the other 3 quit because of the behavior issues of the child. And so it was just me and just me helping out my friend. And there's something about that experience I'll still never forget, just being in a room with this child and just trying to understand how to connect. And so that was the early part of my journey. Later on, that person opened up a clinic, and then I started to work there. And I just really just dove into autism in particular, and really how can I connect with this child? And that was just a great experience. And it just kept going on my journey. So finished my undergrad. My master's was in special education. And so that's when I decided to become a behavior analyst. And then at that point, I was on my way to now sitting across and talking to you.
Can you still remember what that 9-year-old looked like?
Oh, absolutely. He is one of the most important humans I've ever met, and completely changed my course, trajectory on what I was doing. And I'm happy that in some small ways, I helped change his course and his family's course. So I still know their family very well. I think that first experience is important. I had a very gracious family that allowed me to learn as a behavior person and work with their child, and then trusting. In the early days, we had to go do community outings. And so we'd go out in the community, and there's just, lots of unpredictability that would take place. And so he will always hold a special place in my heart. Now it shows not only with the gray on my chin, but, he's 9. He's closer to 30. He's in his 30s. Wow, that's crazy thinking about that. But yeah, I think of him fondly and always check in just to see what he's doing and how he's grown.
You mentioned that several people left. That's so common in our field, in education, in center-based ABA clinic. I'm curious, what kept you there? Have you thought about leaving too during that time as a newbie in the field?
I think for me, it's really just I'm a very curious person. So I always think curiosity, I do a lot of coaching, and curiosity is one of the guiding pillars. A lot of it was a lot of the children didn't have a communication, didn't have a voice. And so I think for me was, how can I create an environment where they have the opportunity to have a voice. And so, although I'm a behavior analyst, behavior was really never my focus. My job is not to help people to comply. My goal is to help people communicate. And so I think that's what got me excited, especially when some of these kids can be challenging at times. And you can imagine if you can't truly communicate, it's difficult to get all of your needs met. It's truly to help people understand how you're thinking or feeling. It can lead to lots of frustration. So I always like to use an analogy. If you stick me in the middle of a foreign country where no one knows English, I'm not going to be able to explain my intelligence to you. I can use hand gestures, I can do some of the activities, but it's not quite the same. And so I think that seed was really strong in my head because I saw the frustration in that young child's head of trying to get access to things. And so I think you couple that, and then two, I do have a lot of, I'll call it competitive spirit, but I don't quit easily. So a lot of resilience. So if today's session did not go well, we didn't get on the same page, I'm going to be back tomorrow and I'm going to keep finding another way to go about it. And I think just that simplicity of what is working and keep doing the things that are working really helped to build the fundamentals. So yeah, I kind of now in that reflection, that's what has allowed me to stay and continue to find the excitement in each person's kind of individual puzzle that we're trying to solve.
And that perseverance has led to you opening how many? 3 clinics back in early 20s, right?
Yes, I opened 3 clinics in general, so it was one at a time. The first one started actually we did in-home first. So we started the company in 2005, did in-home for about 2-ish, almost 3 years. And in the beginning of 2008 was when we opened up our first center. And so, unfortunately, the amount of autism diagnosed kept growing. And so we became very full very fast. So the first one in 2008. The second clinic we opened in 2014, 6 years later. And then the third one was somewhere around 2019, 2018, somewhere in that space. So I've been fortunate. I just happened to have been early in the field. Back when I started in a large city, I think there was 3 clinics total. Now I think there's 50 to 60 clinics. So I think I was just fortunate to kind of sit there. But what it did was give me an opportunity to work with a lot of young kiddos, mainly between 2 to 12, and really try to understand just in the basic terms, how do you improve their communication? How do you help them understand how to get access to the world around them? And then how do you help increase their motivation? And so I think that allowed me with working with a lot of fantastic folks who are now professionals. I'm very happy I have staff that are nurses now, behavior analysts, speech pathologists, almost every of the helping fields. In our clinic days, the company was around for 13 years. We served about close to 800 clients came through our doors and about almost 900 employees. And so that just gave me a lot of information on what works, what doesn't works. And that's where I started to build systems, which of course now is kind of the forefront of what we're doing.
I love how you mentioned that it's never really about behavior. It's about teaching communication, create that connection. Tell us more about that piece where you're running the clinic and seeing over 1,000 of children on spectrum. How do you create that connections?
So I think that's one of the ways. And to be fair, behavior is called behavior therapy. So there's always this kind of aspect of the only thing should be focused on behavior. And there are some people that is their focus. But I think early on, and even to take a step back, before I started the clinic, I actually worked at a residential facility with extreme behavior. And I think you can work on behavior, and it is very important. If a child's having behavior that interferes with learning, it does need to be addressed, but that always becomes the issue. Even if you stop or reduce the behavior, you have to fill it with something. And so I think once I realized that no matter how strong the behavior is, that you need to do something to fill it, I think that became my focus. In general, with behavior analysis, there's the antecedent, there's the behavior, and the consequence. I'm always focused on the antecedent, meaning how do you prevent the behavior from happening in the first place? And I think that's what helped me to have a much healthier way to look at things versus just they need to stop doing this. So that's essentially been my philosophy. And I think that helps me to focus on what's important, meaning the child learning new skills versus stop, no, and don't, and preventing the child from being themselves.
I can see it's such a hard mindset shift, especially for parents when you have a child who self-injure, have a child who runs away in a public place. And how did you go about that conversation with parents? Do you recall some of the hard conversation you had to have with moms and dads?
Yes. And the reason I always think why we're back working with parents is when you're a provider, it is really challenging to focus all your energy on a child who needs assistance on all varying degrees. You also have lots of employees, staff that you have to train, build a system. You're working with healthcare, which is just a broken, unfun way to get paid. So you're really giving just the leftover energy to parents. When they drop them off, you're having these short conversations. I just, from seeing from the parents' perspective, I can just tell just the struggles on dropping this child off, hoping this child is making progress, and then kind of being conflicted. What should I do when they do hit? Should I punish? Should I ignore? And I think it was the cloud of confusion that I saw a lot of parents just kind of essentially freeze. We have the fight, flight, or freeze. They were sometimes just not sure what to do. And so I think that's when they start to disempower. And so they just would hope the provider knew what was taking place and that they can follow behind. So I think for a lot early on, and of course, as a new provider, my focus was so on the kids. So I didn't really spend the deepest time. But as I started to grow in my profession, and more importantly, when I had more bandwidth, I really started to kind of talk with the parents and really try to help on what's important the next 30 days. Because really, none of us knows what's going to happen when your child is 18 years old. I can't promise if the kid's going to talk, not talk, go to college, or be in diapers, right? And I think that's so wide a spectrum makes it very confusing. But as co-collaborators, the provider and the parent, that we can focus on the 30 days that we're going to teach an imitation skill, that we're going to work on identifying the objects in the room, or we're going to work on ignoring a behavior. If your child cries to get a cookie, if we ignore the crying just for the cookie, not the child's hurt, but then if the child gets up and just says "coo," or even gives you eye contact, you've changed the dynamic. And I think when we start to learn to narrow the focus on what's important, now the parent can see how they can have the impact. And so that is where we start to get the aha moment of let's not try to figure everything out. Let's just live our lives 30 to 90 days at a time. And then that way, when we see the progress, now we're both motivated to keep giving hard effort.
Have you seen parents, some of the parents you have worked with, tell us the story of one parent who has gone through that transformation from like, oh my gosh, where do I start? I can't believe this is happening to me, to, I can start small, step one at a time, and then having that mindset of what can I teach my child instead of, oh my gosh, this is another behavior episode.
So one that jumps to mind, this is when we're doing in-home. So this is pre the center days. And there was a young child, young female child, and she happened to do a lot of crying, but a lot of crying for attention. And to make that quick distinction, if any child feels insecure, they should always be taken care of. But sometimes a child will cry to get access to things because they don't know how to communicate. And so for this child, that's what would seem apparent. and doing the observation. And so here I am telling a mom how challenging it is for a mom for me to say, hey, when your child cries, I need you to ignore them just long enough so then you can teach the communication. And she looked at me like I was crazy. How am I going to ignore my child and hear her cry? And so what we tried to explain was we're only ignoring the crying for getting access to the item so that we can teach your child a better way to communicate. And what I told her was, give us up to 2 weeks. If within 2 weeks we can't get anywhere, I'm more than happy. And I also told her, we will not let your child cry for more than 15 minutes. And I still will stand through it. And I know crying is challenging, but a child has not passed away through crying yet. At most, they'll fall asleep and you can work through it. And so I saw that mom pretty much say, okay, this is what you're promising. And this is in home. So she is around the corner as we're doing the therapy. And the girl did have a very healthy cry, and I can definitely almost kind of hear the mom around the corner. But it probably took about 4 to 6 sessions and little bursts. So we would work for like 2 minutes and stop, take a full break. But the young child turned a corner and started to realize, and I can't remember if it was a cookie or a toy. It was like a couple different things, but started to realize, oh, if I just say this, I get access to it. And seeing that crying reduce, and it reduced relatively quickly in that span, that parent is like the light bulb went off on what we were doing is just really replacing functional communication. And then that parent was bought in. So now, we asked to, of course, add on different skills, and we would do some work. We would give objectives to that mom, and we would come back and she had it completely locked down. And that's one of those where all the stories are different, but I was really happy to see how once the child understood and once the mom understood, it was like it was off to the races. And we were able to kind of, safely kind of discharge. There were no other extreme behaviors. It was just changing the way that they communicated with each other is what we end up doing in that case.
I think there's so much power in parents actually observing that, see how the child changes the behavior based on how adults respond to the crying. And I think it's one thing to tell parents like, this is our plan, this is what it looks like. This is very different from actually parents see how a clinician handles that, and then the interaction between the clinician and the child.
It is, and I guess it brings up a question because I've done in-home services, I've done clinic-based. They both have pros and cons, but I think ultimately I preferred clinic-based just because it allowed me to train staff more. But I do think we miss the parent seeing the change.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they just drop the kid off and then they get the kid back and the kid starts to make progress, the parent doesn't know where and how to make that impact in the home setting. So I think a lot, even for providers to really think about, is they need to demonstrate video and have that type of live model so that they can see what is taking place using normal language. So in our clinic, we actually did, every time we did an assessment, we would video. And we would video kind of especially about every 2 weeks or every month, depending on where we were. And I think that helped us to kind of build the momentum of, okay, this is where we're doing teaching imitation skills. This was day one. And day one is normally just a mess. And then here was day 14. And we could see the kid maybe sitting a little longer or more curious about the environment. And then we saw a breakthrough that they started to, instead of 20% doing something 20% of the time, they got to 80%. And then at some point, they got to 100%. And even just the little clips of video were very important. So this is where, and that was in the early 2000s. Now with all this technology, now with everyone with phones, I think documenting progress in key junctures can help that parent get the aha so much faster than in our earlier days.
I see similar thing in school because I have to train a lot of teachers' aides and a special ed teacher. I had one kid, yesterday, first day of school and haven't been in school for 6 months because the child was out of country. And just to have the aid seeing, when there is a tantrum, how do we, like you said, you are ignoring the behavior, but you're not ignoring the child. Let the child know you are there. And then it was just so funny to see the child crying at the same time, reading the story with me when I say, can you find a bear? And then he was crying at the same time, pointing where the bear was on the book.
It's challenging when there's no system set up. And communication is just a system. How do I get access to the world around me? How do I let people know what's happening inside of me? And then how do I embrace my curiosity? And so that's essentially what we're trying to do is try to put a child into space where it's easier for them to communicate. And it doesn't always have to be words. I always think, and words are the cleanest form of communication, as long as someone can speak clearly. But a child can just use simple sign language. It doesn't have to be complicated. For a lot of kids, even learning just 10 signs to know what a cookie is, to know music, to know mom and dad, just really helps them to be able to access the world around them. So I highly encourage any parent or provider is just to do an informal assessment of what your kid likes. If your kid likes apples, then try to have a quick sign for apple. For your kid, they guys have a favorite dog, then you can use dog as also a way, because then you're teaching the connection. Is every time the child does a sign or picture exchange, that's another way with these tablets, and they get instant access to the item, that builds that communication brain connection. Oh, that is a dog. And I can say dog. Some cases I could just go duh. I can say a picture of a dog. And now that young child goes from running and grabbing, which is the most common form of communication for young kids, right? They just run and grab, or they do the lead the mom, right? They lead the parent with their hand, like the magic finger to the cookies. It's always like cookies or some sugary food. So I think that is the important thing, to show parents that they can do that. They can take a child from someone who's just leading them to things to get them to initiate communication. And I think once a parent sees that they have that power, now they realize, oh, I can teach my kid lots of things with just a little bit of guidance.
Thinking about the home based and the center based, I think that's a lot of parents ask that question. Should I choose home based? Should I choose center based?
So if I had to kind of break down the difference between the two, so I'll do a pros and cons on both sides. So the pros of in-home is you get much more parent involvement. You're in the house, right? Mom and dad can hear therapy. If it's going well, if it's going poor, they're right there. The second one is, especially for younger kids, pretty much I'll say kids 3 and younger, or I guess even 4 and younger, they're gonna be a little bit more comfortable initially at home. Because it's their house. So they have a kind of a normal spot to do it. So I think those are two of the best positives. And I can see scenarios, especially when you have young kids, 18-month-olds, less than 2-year-olds, where in-home first might be a little bit better. The downsides of in-home are sometimes on the provider side, it is so challenging to staff consistently for in-home therapy, because you have to take a therapist, and you have to take a therapist to drive all over the city trying to work with kids for 2 to 3 hours. It gets really challenging, and the therapists tend to wear out. It's just really hard to pour your energy to a child, get into a car, brave crazy traffic, and go pour your heart into another child, eat some crappy fast food, and try to do it a third time. And I think there's just something about that. Plus, it's hard for that therapist to get better of having someone to train, someone right there to help guide them. So I think that's kind of the cons that go with that. And then 2, to be honest, sometimes there's just challenges at home. Meaning sometimes there's a brother or sister who's always trying to interrupt the therapy session because they want attention too. Sometimes it's just, you're in someone's house. It just can be a little nutty sometimes. So I think it's hard to stay consistent, meaning We would put all the toys and things that we need, and we'd come back 2 days later, and then all the toys are all over the place. And so we have to go find the materials and all those activities. I'd say it was the cons of in-home. From a clinic standpoint, the pros is that there's just lots of stability. The toys tend to be in the same place. The therapists are all coming to one location, so it's easier for them to see each other, meaning the therapy gets better, I think, a little faster that way. And then two, you start to be able to do kind of things that you can't have at in-home. So our clinic had an occupational therapy gym inside of it. And unless you have lots of money, you don't have that capability to really do all the sensory needs that these kids have. We had speech pathologists on staff. So a kid could come, get their behavior, speech, and OT all at the same time. So just the amenities that you just can't do in an in-home setting were definitely a positive. And so that's why we switched from in-home to clinic-based. In terms of the drawbacks is what we just talked about. It's that we lose a little bit of the parent hands-on nature. And yes, we brought parents in. Yes, we had, these live parent trainings, but it's just different when a parent's in their home. There's a little bit more of a warpedness. When you're going to an office, there's a difference between you going to see a doctor or a doctor coming to see you. Really sometimes alters the relationship. So in some ways, I happen to have been a little closer to some of the in-home parents initially, and some of the parents when our clinic was small. But once we got to about 30 to 50 kiddos at the same time, now the professionalism, which is a good thing, but we don't really dive deep as we used to. So that's the cons of clinic life.
Yeah, I can see what you mean with very young children, like 2-year-old, just learning how to talk. It can be very hard to leave the family setting and come to a center the child doesn't even know. Back to the idea of the field has evolving so much, right? Like when you think about starting a clinic 20 years ago, now thinking back to when you started with that 9-year-old, what do you wish you could have known back then?
If I had to go back in the past and talk to me on my first day, I think it's realizing that I first thought that this was kind of a couple of kids have autism. I had no idea that 20 plus years later, we haven't gotten much better of having systematic ways to help these kiddos. And I think that's just the unfortunate reality. And I think from all fields, education, the therapies, your behavior, your speech, your occupational. Now, we have improved on the techniques. I don't think we're not in the caveman days or the early days of therapy, but I think it's more about having just better systems in place. School systems are overwhelmed. And whether you're in a good school system or a poor school system, there's always going to be more kids diagnosed with special needs, because it's not just autism. We have ADHD, ADD, we have OCD, all these other, and there'll be new ones that will continue to spring up. We'll always have more people being diagnosed with needing some special assistance than qualified people. And I think that's the one area is we don't have enough qualified people to truly help. And then on top of that, the systems aren't helping. Some school districts do a great job, and so I applaud the school districts who do, but I would argue more of them don't do a good job. You have one teacher, an unqualified aide, and she's got 10 to 20 kids of special needs. There's not much learning happening in that environment. And then from provider side, there's some poorly run centers where the therapists are changing out. It feels like a rotating door of therapists. They don't really have a good system in place. They don't really know how to teach communication skills. And so I think if I had to go back and tell myself is figure out the best system possible and keep teaching and training. We need as many people as possible to know how to help the kiddos. And most importantly, spending more time with the family to have their own system. Because from me seeing lots of parents, and there's no equivalence. Some came in with lots of money. Some came in with no money. That wasn't a factor. Some came in with different religions, different political stances. None of those things mattered. To me, the strongest things that mattered was How much time did the family build a system at home and were on the same page to really help their child? So if their child exhibited this behavior, were they all united on how they were going to go about it? Or was everyone just doing their thing? Grandma did one thing, the brother did something else. So it was a consistency that was important. So that's how I would go back. Help people be consistent. Help them to have clarity. Help them to understand what is important right now. Not thinking about what's going to happen 5 years from now, not what is going to happen or worry about what's happened 18 years, but what is good for your child now. Maybe just learning 2 words is the most important thing. Maybe it's trying to have better mornings so that the morning's just not a chaotic madhouse and that everyone at the end of the morning is just at wit's end and it's already 10 o'clock in the morning. So being consistent, having that clarity, and then realizing that, unfortunately, everyone needs to be a little squeaky wheel, meaning we have to advocate for people who don't have a voice. And by understanding how to be a good advocate, because you could be a good advocate and you could be a poor advocate. I don't think yelling on Facebook solves anything, but I think really being clear on, once you have that clarity, go to the school and say, okay, these are the things that we need to get done. These are things that I really need to see on my IEP, and I will keep following up. I will not just fade away in the corner and the school district hopes that the school year ends and then we repeat this process next year. And the same for providers. Every 4 to 6 weeks, I encourage parents just to ask a question to whoever provider and say, what objective things have made progress? And there's not always sparkling progress, but if your provider doesn't have a plan, if your provider is not consistent or doesn't have clarity, then everyone is frustrated and no one's winning. Provider's not winning because there's lots of turnover. The parents are not winning because the kid's not making enough progress. But most importantly, that kid is not winning. They're still frustrated. They still don't know how to get access to items or get access to a toy. And so that's how I would tell myself. Systems win. Emotions are great. They help for motivation. But the parents who learn how to build a system will give their child the best opportunity to succeed.
And have that sustaining results.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I think that's why we started the PC.
We started it because I sold the clinic. I started to do other things. I got into executive coaching. Of course, we met and you're in the school district. So here I am in one place seeing what's broken. And here are you in a completely other spot seeing what's broken. And then kind of looking at, well, what can we do? And parents was just a natural choice because parents can't control the school district that they're in. They can't control if the provider is going to be good, bad, indifferent, but they do have control over what's happening in the home. And I think once me and you had that aha moment, that kind of started the PEC vision. We have to empower the parents. You know, we train lots of folks. Why can't we just train parents on how to teach the simplest of skills? You don't have to sit across from your child and be a teacher. You're just really learning how to do functional play. You're learning how to embrace your curiosity while embracing your child's curiosity. I like the fact that we build on strengths. So it's not just always what your kid can't do. It's just saying, hey, your kid really likes to play with blocks. How can we use blocks as a teaching tool to teach communication, to teach that this is blue versus this is red? And so that gave us the motivation to build something that's just simple. Simple, fundamental ways to learn from your standpoint, simple ways to look at leveraging biology. Improving sleep helps everybody, not just your child, but helps you. Improving how we go about thinking about nutrition and making sure kids are getting some nutrition and really trying to optimize the day. How do we make the first hour of the day go as smooth as possible? Let's look at the last hour of the day. How do we make sure that the last hour of the day goes as smooth as possible and make things more frictionless? Start to empower the parent that I can ask questions of my provider and not just hope and pray that they're doing the job. And so that's the mission that we're on, and that's our vision. And we're going to keep pushing it as far as possible and as help as many parents as we can.
You know, that's just so amazing to think about how much parents have done for their kids, and this is a long journey. And I remember I lived with a child when I came to the United States, started my grad school. When I came, that child was only 3, 4 year old, and now it's like 18. And I was checking with mom, and she said, now his shoe size is size 12. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, like, think about this kiddo. I remember we would drive to speech therapists, the ABA clinic, the OT therapist, the RDI therapist, and sometimes they come home and different pediatricians. The number of people that have come to this kid's life, I think is not fewer than 100. But now the child graduates from high school, there's really only mom and dad.
That's such an amazing way to think about that. The whole it takes a village, but in some cases, it takes two villages. At some point, all the school services go away. It's unfortunate. Government services are average to poor, depending on what state that you're in. But mom and dad, or a parent or a caregiver, someone is there to provide. And that is very important. Because if the parents don't have the right skills, don't have the right mentality, and actually more importantly, don't have the energy. I just see a lot of parents that the system just kind of beats us down. And so when you go out seeking help and you realize that the help is not good, I can definitely see the demotivation. And I even remember parents, as they start to drop off, just kind of hoping I don't fail them. Just please, will you do the best for my child? And I don't think parents should be in that position, And so I think for us is saying, let's see what we can teach parents. And each parent and family can have their own journey. So they all don't have to learn the same thing, but there's lots of fundamentals, especially for young kids. And so although we work with all kids from 2 to 92, we spend a lot of our time with the kids that are 4 and younger. Kid is young enough, small enough, and now we can have a stable amount of things we can teach. Identifying the objects in the environment. Of course, we're the hugest fans of imitation. That is the bedrock of all or most of the skills that need to be taught. If you want your kid to talk, they'll need to be able to imitate first. If you want your kid to be able to play, they need to learn how to imitate first. Same thing with direction following. And so I think that's what gets us excited. We've done a lot of teaching and training. Me with staff, both of us with staff. And I think now it's just applying all things we've learned from coaching executives, from coaching staff, and our two systems, and kind of merging together and just really give the parents all the tools that allows them to feel successful.
Thinking about the curriculum piece, I remember when I was first year teaching, one of the support provided by the district is this instructional coach, Rachel. She has done this for a long time, and she came to my classroom. I was new first year teacher, and something she said just forever sticks with me. And she said, teachers really just need two things. They need to know what to teach, and they need to know how to teach. And that just nailed it. And as a mom, you need to know what to teach your child. There's so many targets you can teach. As imitation, it should be one of the first targets to teach. And then how to teach, back to the habit, back to how do you form a plan, what to do today, just focus on the present moment. Now, when you think about what to teach and how to teach and thinking about our vision to empower parents, how do you see our company provide parents with the two things, what to teach and how to teach?
So what to teach is kind of the early child development skills. And so really it's looking at what should an 18-month-old know at that point. And if your child is a little behind, that's not the worst thing in the world, but it gives us a guidepost. I always think our job is just to teach how the brain learns naturally. If we have to teach every skill to a child, they're not going to learn fast enough. And we know that children make huge progress from they're born to 5. You almost learn everything you need to within that time frame. So that's always our guidepost. What are the guideposts at 12 months, 18 months, 20 months, 24, and so on? And that gives us the fundamentals of the what to teach. And so that's why we have about 8 to 12 kind of common programs that we're teaching parents that really are the building blocks for all future learning activities. The how to teach is really giving them a game plan. So it's really being systematic on how to teach. So maybe the parent spends 2 to 5 minutes and they just get the kid excited and motivated, peekaboo and tickle games. And then they shift maybe the next 2 to 5 minutes on teaching imitation skills. And so mom puts in a yoga video and they both try to do yoga together. And mom can prompt that way. And afterwards, they spend 2 to 5 minutes playing with blocks. And the kid can give the blue block versus the red block. And the parent can give commentary. Oh, look what I'm doing with the block. So because we're providing structure, the parent doesn't have to create it all from scratch. So just think about when you cook and there's a recipe, it's so much different than to say, hey, cook this complicated meal. What we're doing is giving parents the recipe guideline. And then once they understand the recipe, now they can freestyle. They can do things that are better fit for them. But if we can build a good recipe book, essentially, to help them have confidence to work with their child, I think that puts parents in the best position to feel the motivation, but then really understand the basics of child development.
And to wrap up, Michael, if you can think of like just one tip that parents can do right now after listening to our podcast, after look at our website, and then the imitation modules we have made available to parents, what would you say one thing they can do, a small thing they can do today?
The simplest thing to do today is commit to fight for 15 minutes, meaning every day commit to doing something for 15 minutes. I'm going to observe my kid for 15 minutes and write notes on what sensory things that they interact. Are they normally doing things with their eyes, with their ears? And I write notes. The next day, I'm going to commit to 15 minutes of just seeing how much I can make my kid laugh and give me eye contact. The next day, I'm going to fight for 15 minutes to reflect before the kids get up or when they, as soon as they go to school. I'm just going to reflect and focus. How am I feeling? And making sure I'm doing things like gratitude. Make sure I'm doing things like understanding if I feel overwhelmed and try to have a small plan in place. If you can commit to fighting for 15 minutes of something with intent, you'll start to feel that motivation. And I think that is where the parents who see the success in themselves and their child, a lot of it goes through their commitment. And so that is the biggest thing. Find that thing every day to fight for, give it 15 minutes, and see what happens throughout that journey.
Well said. Well, if you're a parent and if you happen to be watching this recording, this podcast, we really hope you can join us, fight for 15 minutes. And we have imitation modules available. Right now will be free to parents. Hopefully we'll see you there and learn together and fight for 15 minutes for our children. We'll see you next episode.
See you next episode.